This Georgia Department of Education screencast is intended to provide teachers of 5th grade social studies with content knowledge to aid in teaching the Georgia Standards of Excellence. In this screencast, we will see how the technological developments at the turn of the century and the industry required to fuel World War I usher in a period of financial security for most Americans. Many items that save time and money, like the automobile, are now affordable thanks to Henry Ford's assembly lines, allowing Americans leisure time to enjoy culture and sports. We will look at how a poor neighborhood in New York called Harlem was at the center of this resurgence in the arts, and how a dashing young pilot made America want to fly. Welcome to the Roaring Twenties. After World War I, America was ready to get back to normal. It may surprise students to learn that in many cases, at least for the victor, war can be very good for the economy. Such was the case for the United States with World War I. Industry, which was already on the rise, saw unprecedented growth. Factories had to significantly ramp up production quickly to fill the insatiable need of our armed forces for everything from food and clothing to guns and tanks, and a whole lot of stuff in between. New manufacturing tools, technologies, and techniques were developed to make production lines faster and more efficient. Our population distribution also saw a major shift from rural areas to urban areas as young people migrated to the city to take advantage of the many new jobs this booming industry offered. This process is often referred to as urbanization. This was to be the beginning of the Great Migration that saw over 6 million African Americans or blacks move from rural areas, mostly in the South, to northern cities where opportunities were significantly better and discrimination was, at least marginally, lower. By the end of World War I, about half of America lived in the cities and surrounding areas. One of the leading American industrialists whose innovations in assembly line production were at least partly responsible for this shift was Henry Ford. Ford himself had been born on a farm and later moved to find a job in the city of Detroit. Now, contrary to popular belief, Ford and his self-named Ford Motor Company did not invent the automobile. What he did was apply the principles of the assembly line to the production of the automobile to make it affordable to the average working American rather than the frivolous luxury it had been up until that time. His idea was that if you mass-produce something, make a lot of it so you increase the supply, you can price it more competitively, inexpensively, which means that more people can afford it, and so you can also increase the demand for it. In fact, the economic term for coupling mass production of something with high demand for it generating huge consumption is called Fordism, after Henry Ford. The idea behind mass production via an assembly line is that rather than have a small group of workers work together to produce an entire automobile, for example, you have a large group of workers produce many automobiles by having each worker complete just a single task over and over again while the car moves down the line from station to station. So, for example, a car moves down the assembly line, and as it goes along, one worker simply stands at a station and puts bolts in the wheels. The car moves on, and the next car comes along, and the worker repeats the procedure. The worker at the next station down the line puts the wheels on the car, and the next worker down the lines tightens the bolts, and so on. This way of producing goods created a huge need for workers, and while these workers were relatively low paid, it was far better than the earnings they could hope for on the farm. Many goods that people used to make themselves were now cheaper and easier to simply purchase instead. This, coupled with the convenience of transportation the automobile afforded, resulted in Americans finding themselves with free time on their hands, and so they sought entertainment and culture. One of the entertainments they sought was baseball. All of this economic prosperity, combined with fewer hours needed to spend just going on about the business of living, helped to make baseball America's favorite pastime. In 1920, the price of a ticket to see a ball game was $1, the equivalent of about $12 today, which had now become pretty affordable for the average working American. Additionally, with the first radio broadcast of a baseball game in August of 1921, and thanks to mass production and assembly lines, radios being relatively affordable, baseball was a cheap and easy source of entertainment for the whole family. Into this picture steps a powerful hitter by the name of George Herman Ruth, known as Babe, at the same time as a change in rules that favored hitters and higher scores more so than previously. The higher scoring games and chances to see big home runs hit off of Babe's bat brought crowds to the fields and made iconic the image of the American family clustered around the radio on a Saturday night listening to the ball game. Free time also led people to seek out cultural forms of entertainment such as music, dance, literature, and the other arts. And as more and more people moved to the cities, they became the epicenters for this renaissance, the term for an explosion of arts and other culture. No place epitomizes this better than Harlem. The Great Migration discussed earlier in this screencast brought many African Americans or blacks out of the South and into the city of New York, and the artists among them found their new home in Harlem, a poor neighborhood in the borough of Manhattan. Langston Hughes, a talented young poet, was among them. Hughes came to New York to attend Columbia University, and though he dropped out a year later, he remained in the city to become an integral part of the Harlem Renaissance. What made Langston Hughes different from other poets was his break from the traditional rhyme and verse in favor of the African American or black themes, rhythms, and heritage. The various arts of a particular age do not exist in a vacuum and cannot help but be influenced by each other, and the work of Langston Hughes was no exception. During the same time Hughes was attending Columbia in New York, the jazz age was exploding onto the Harlem scene. Jazz music was everywhere, and its rhythms and themes, along with those of the blues, flowed into Hughes's work. In fact, he even collaborated directly with jazz musicians and read his poems to the accompaniment of jazz bands. Which leads us to our next cultural development and individual contribution to the 1920s, Louis Armstrong and the Jazz Age. Like the poetry of Langston Hughes, the rhythms of jazz were different and had their roots in African American or black culture and heritage. Jazz music is characterized by the blending of different, unexpected rhythm shifts, called syncopation, that give it a slightly off-beat sound, as well as improvisation where the musicians play music as it comes to them, rather than what is written down. Louis Armstrong, also known as Satchmo, or Pops, was a trumpet player and singer who was a master of this unique style. Armstrong came to New York to join the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra, the top African American or black band of the time. Fletcher Henderson's orchestra was the house band at the Cotton Club, a nightclub located in Harlem that hosted musical revues featuring many of the musicians and styles that would come to have a huge influence on the development of music across the globe. And speaking of crossing the globe, our next cultural icon didn't exactly cross the globe, but he did cross the Atlantic Ocean and was the first pilot to do it solo without making any stops. Charles Lindbergh and his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, flew from Roosevelt Field outside of New York, 3,600 miles and 33.5 hours to Le Bourget Field outside Paris, France. This daring feat made